Get your affairs in order. It's the penultimate Star Trek Discovery. Space. A continuous extension interval between planets, stars and other objects. These are the critiques of the critic McElvoy. His continuing mission to review strange new shows, to seek out new work and new bastardizations, to boldly note what no critic has noted before. Hello everybody, you're very welcome to this, the penultimate Critics Log for Star Trek Discovery. Wow, could it be it's nearly over after all of this time? Has it really been 7 years since we first laid eyes on Mick, since we first had that encroaching sense of dread and disappointment? The idea that Star Trek has been taken further and further away from the concept and ideas that we once held dear. Yes, it could be. It is. It has been 7 years. 7 years and 5 grueling seasons. We didn't expect to still be here now talking about Star Trek Discovery because, of course, we were wedded to an older system. A system in which there was a link between a show's viewership and its longevity. But that was the old model. Streaming model severed that connection absolutely. So Star Trek Discovery was pre-funded and maybe locked in for 5 seasons by the terms of the production arrangement between Alex Kurtzman's Secret Hideout, and if I was doing what they were doing, I'd want to do it in secret as well, and CBS Paramount, who own Star Trek, although to own is obviously not to care for. So we're nearly at the end. Not quite. Before we can get to the end, we have to get through this episode, Lagrange Point, directed by Jonathan Frakes.
What do you want to be when you grow up? What's the right tip? Have you called a plumber to your home lately? How superstitious are you? How much money would it take to make you spend a night in a cemetery? Would you display this as a trophy? Do you have a pet? Do you have a sweet tooth? Do you believe in the power of a curse? Have you had your hearing tested lately? Planning a trip soon? Can you remember the tallest man you've ever seen? Do you love to go a-wandering beneath a clear blue sky? Have you noticed what big stars real estate agents have become? Are you careful with your personal records? Does your computer ever seem to have a mind of its own? Have you ever visited a Chinatown section in a major city? Have you ever visited a flea market? Have you ever visited a truck stop? Did you ever have a job as a waiter? Have you noticed how many successful restaurants are theme-based these days? Have you ever had the desire to write your initials in wet cement?
His final contribution to Star Trek Discovery. I couldn't name any of the others because there aren't really very many memorable episodes in this series. This was probably his best effort for the show. And I say that not because I can remember any of his other efforts, but because this was not a bad episode. Again, 2 in a row. Why do I say that? Because, like last week's episode, it was focused. You know, it was a simple kind of heist Rogue One type narrative. You know, you get into enemy territory, you get the thing, and you get out. They still crowbarred in the odd scene with Mick and Book discussing their relationship, and there's a little bit of soppiness with Saru and Tarina back at Federation HQ and so on. This wouldn't be Discovery without a few melodramatic asides. But for the most part, the show stuck to the A-plot, and it was better for that. There's not much of an A-plot. It's all very superficial pleasure. But it was okay. It was buoyed along by a fairly good score. You know, we don't talk about the score on Star Trek Discovery, do we? But it was okay in this episode. I noticed it. And I noticed that the musical cues heightened some scenes. Just ostensibly what a score is always supposed to do, but on Star Trek has not always been the case. And I had strange thoughts watching Lagrange Point. I thought, do you know what? I don't entirely hate these characters the way that they're constituted here. Because Rayner has become sort of acerbic and gung-ho and antisocial. Mick is more collegiate and more friendly. I thought, do you know what? I don't hate it every time I see it on screen these days. Tilly, been alright this year. On and off. You know, Rayner's a good character because he addresses Tilly's imbecility in a constructive way. Draws attention to it and undercuts it. That's a smart move. Still doesn't explain why everybody has such great respect for Tilly, but it's a good acknowledgement in universe that she is an irritant. So not a bad episode. But of course not one, you know, that's ever going to be marked as a classic either. Not an episode that's ever going to be rewatched by anybody. This video may be the only record in the future that episode exists. People will watch this and say, hey, what's he talking about? Lagrange Point. We better seek that out. That's right, I'm daring to suggest that I have more longevity than Star Trek Discovery. What a humble brag that is. History, of course, will decide. Lagrange Point refers apparently to the sort of equidistant, gravitationally stable area between two black holes, I'm told. I didn't look it up, and I don't care. You look it up. There's some physicists amongst you, I'm sure. You tell me what the fuck it means. But that's where Discovery, and then a few moments later the Breen, found a floating oil drum which contained the progenitor's technology. But before Mick and co could get their greedy little hands on it, the Breen tractor beamed it into their massive ship, a lot of which, you know, is hollow and therefore faces out into open space, but we'll come back to that. And started to experiment on it. Remember, at the beginning of this episode, they still think Discovery's crew are dead. So Mick and co hatched a plan to use the Breen ship's exhaust ports, their point of vulnerability. Wonder where they got that plot point from. To go onto the Breen ship, infiltrate it, find the technology, and steal it and then take it back to Discovery or whatever, or beam everybody out of there. Why couldn't they beam it out from the Discovery without having to infiltrate the Breen ship? I don't know. Because episode. Because plot. Because in the 32nd century, the technology and the parameters of the technology are ill-defined, unlike in TNG's 24th century. And consequently, technology is as good or bad as it needs to be to service the plot. Why is the Discovery still the only Federation starship with a spore drive? Why in the 32nd century, nearly 1,000 years on from the time of Star Trek's Discovery's initial seasons, do they not have the means to simply replicate this technology, put it on every Federation starship, and so, you know, have the means to jump to any location in aid of any Federation starship in distress? Discovery's never answered that question, and I'm not sure it's even been asked. I'd have to consult previous logs. You would have thought in the 32nd century one could beam an oil drum from a Breen dreadnought to a Federation starship, but no. Why not? I'm sure they said, but it's all technobabble, all nonsense. The real reason was because they needed to get Mick and co onto that ship so we could have a story. You have to contrive things like that when you have a 10-hour story to tell, to fill. Remember the Chase, the TNG episode of which this is a distended remake, was a mere 44 minutes long. So Mick went aboard and had a little aside where she said, "Book, I've missed you," and Book said, "I've missed you, Mick." But it all ended up, as of course inevitably would be, with Mick and her mirror, Mole, exchanging harsh words with the progenitor, you know, in front of the progenitor's technology. When they opened the oil drum, they discovered that inside was some sort of interdimensional portal that whisked you away into white space. Where do you go? We don't know. Still don't know. There's only one episode left. We still don't know what's going on. At the end of the episode, spoilers, Mole went in, determined as she is to save Locke's life even though he's dead. Because remember, progenitor tech may be able to conveniently bring the dead back to life. We don't know how it does that. No one's explained why they think that's the case, but apparently that is the working theory. It can do that amongst other things. It's referred to in this episode as the power of creation. An echo there of the Genesis device. Mick went in to the portal with Locke. The oil drum was blown out into space, as per Discovery's plan to get everything out into open space so they could beam it away. But the oil drum was destroyed, and so the portal ended up in open space between these two black holes. Rayner said something awful like, "Failure is not an option. We gotta go in. We gotta get him. We gotta go in and get the captain, and we're gonna do it." And that was the end of the episode. That is your cliffhanger for the final ever episode of Star Trek Discovery. So inside the progenitor's dimensional portal are Mick, the virtuous, and Mole, the insane. But is she insane? Is she bad? She's driven by love. She's a damaged individual. Just because she's damaged doesn't make her bad, does it? Does it? You're damaged. Are you a bad person? Harks back to what we've been discussing over 9 grueling weeks. The tests were put in place to ensure that only the good person, only the virtuous individual, would win the prize. A la, you know, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He got to that room, didn't he, with all the grails. And Donovan, the Nazi, went for the ostentatious Grail, the one aligned with his junk values, and paid the fucking price.
You chose poorly.
An educated man, a more humble man perhaps, went for the simple cup, the simple wooden cup, and that was the right one. Mick is apparently someone who possesses that sort of self-knowledge, and therefore is the progenitor's champion. She has reached the end game, but so too has a woman who's aligned herself with a race of genocidal thugs. She should not have got that close, you might think. But the two of them are in there now. But in where? Because we still don't have any idea what the hell is inside the progenitor's oil drum. The literal power of creation is how the progenitor's technology was described in this episode, I think by Stamets. And again, it makes us think about the Genesis device. I know we've gone on about this a lot, but for one last time, by way of compare and contrast, let's recall that the Genesis device was explained in that then pioneering 60 seconds of computer animation in Star Trek 2, in that great exposition scene, in a very simple and very impressive demonstration. Its function and purpose was illustrated in very simple terms. And in the discussion that followed that demo, the stakes were laid out in very simple terms. What would happen, asked McCoy, if this thing were used where life already existed? It would destroy such life, answered Spock. That's all you need to fucking know, isn't it? If the wrong people get hold of this thing and they fire it at Earth, let's say, it destroys all life on Earth. You get a fresh new planet. The Klingons can stick their flag in it. Welcome to Kronos 2. It's dangerous in the wrong hands. Terraforming technology in the right hands that can be used to solve the problems of overpopulation and galactic hunger and all the rest of it. That's its real purpose. But potentially a deadly weapon. Nice and simple. We get it. Thank you very much. Let's get on with the rest of the story. We understand what's at stake. What's at stake in Discovery Season 5? We still don't know. It's going to be a surprise. We're going to get to the final episode and we're going to discover that there's a thing. Mick and Mull are in a thing. What will they discover inside the vortex? What are they going to be presented with? One of the progenitors, perhaps? Who will say to them, "You have arrived. You've arrived, and it is my privilege to say to you the worthy traveller, that you are all the same. Sorry, was that it? Do you know what we've fucking gone through to... We've gone through all of that for a little bit of COD philosophy? But Discovery implies it's got to be more than a speech. It can't just be the end of the chase, can it? There has got to be something tangible that they can grab that may cause the destruction of the Federation or the Breen or what have you. They've established there's some destructive potential there weeks ago in that time jumping episode. The Federation HQ is in ruins because apparently the Breen have been successful. We just have to hope, don't we, that writers on this shit show have some idea of what it is they're going to present us with. Now, this is the final episode of the series, and I imagine the temptation must be to end the show on a philosophical note, to present a speech or a situation that embodies, as these ill-educated half-wits see it, the spirit of Star Trek. They'd want to end the show on that sort of note, wouldn't they? On a note of, you know, optimism and togetherness and progressivism. They could pat themselves on the back. Well done, we've done it. They may have absolutely no idea what the progenitor tech threat is, and therefore one way of dealing with that would be for us to discover that there was no threat. That the prize was not, you know, something dangerous at all. But it has been talked about in those terms. The scientists that hid all the clues and all of that obviously thought that it was dangerous, potentially dangerous. It's a lot to untangle, a lot to explain in the final episode ever of this show. And I can't take too long either, because let's say it's an hour-long episode. Well, you've got about 40 minutes of that to wrap up the story, and 20 minutes after that to wrap up the story of all the principal characters. We don't want this thing to end the way Voyager ended, you know. Welcome home! Cut to black. No! You want to see the characters adjusting to life after the adventure. Give them a moment or two. It's not going to be a Discovery movie. It's going to pick everything up in a year's time. This, God willing, will be the last we'll ever see of these characters. Surely. Although, I'm sure if it's up to Alex Kurtzman, they will reappear in future spin-offs like Starfleet Academy and all the rest of it. But on the assumption we never see them again, there's a lot to be done on next week's show. And on that note, let's do anomalous readings. Of all the mistakes in Star Trek Discovery, of all the cul-de-sacs it's taken us down, of all the un-Trek-like characters it's introduced us to, two things it's done right are Saru and Tarina. That's you know, the Kelpian and the Vulcan. Two very Trek-like characters who I like very much, and I'm sure you do too. Okay, they've been reduced to a bit of sort of one-note melodramatic kind of romance. I suppose the show might end with their wedding, which would be alright, I suppose. But I just wish that they were more central to the show than they have been. They've barely been in it this season. And they're the only characters in the show that make it feel like Star Trek for me. I'd just like to have seen a bit more of them. Is that too much to ask? Saru looked weird in the scene in which he was introduced in this episode, as if somebody had failed to paint his prosthetics. Could have just been the lighting, but it put me off. There was one scene in this episode which was quite oppressive. Jonathan Frakes decided to represent the characters inside their Breen helmets Tony Stark-like, you know, with face on, with the graphics around them and so on. And in one scene, they were all lined up together via split screen, and it was odd. It had a very strange effect on me. I found it incredibly oppressive. I can't say why, but it was horrifying in some way. The writers got their customary use of the word shit into this episode. Got to keep it edgy. But I think someone's trying to win a bet here. I'm convinced of that now. It cannot be a coincidence that the word shit is in every episode of this season. Somebody's trying to tell us something, or someone's trying to win a bet. You decide. The Breen ship's design was very odd. A lot of it opened out onto space, which would make it, I don't know, quite easy for an enemy to sabotage its force fields and have its contents spill out into the void, killing officers and allowing them to beam away precious cargo, for example. Hey, just a thought. And that was it. That was the penultimate Star Trek Discovery. Next week, it's over. It's finally over. Will we miss Mick and co? How will we live without Mick? I don't know. She's been part of our lives for so long. It's hard to imagine it without her, isn't it? But soon she'll be gone. I'm not sure how I'll live. Still, we'll talk about that next week in what promises to be a very special episode of Critic's Log. You won't want to miss it. I'll see you then. Until then, let's fly. I don't know.
Let's fly.